Analog horror has quickly become one of the most diverse genres of video you can possibly find on the internet. You can find analog horror series for everything from Family Guy to Sonic the Hedgehog to freaking Teletubbies. Pretty much no series or character has avoided the analog horror treatment. So, as it's October, aka Spooky Month, and with Halloween being right around the corner, I thought it would be a perfect time to potentially scale some analog horror series. And what is a better matchup than taking the biggest versus debate of all time, Goku vs. Superman, and analog horrifying it. As it turns out, there are a bunch of different series and videos right here on YouTube that take both Goku and Superman and give them the analog horror treatment. So how strong are these monstrous and evil versions of the Man of Steel, and ultimately how do they compare to the horrifying interpretations of Goku? Let's find out. If you like this kind of stuff, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's jump right in. This video also features the work of a lot of different people here on YouTube, so please make sure to check out their channels because this video can't exist without the hard work of fellow YouTubers. Now, for this video, we will be covering multiple analog horror series, all found right here on YouTube, putting an analog horror Superman up against an analog horror Goku. If the Superman is stronger, he gets put up against a different Goku, or vice versa, until we find who hopefully is truly the strongest in the realm of analog horror. Ultimately, there are far more analog horror series covering Superman rather than Goku, so I'm not going to be able to cover them all, but regardless, let's begin with the Superman analog horror video made by the YouTuber Randomizer 209 with DC Earth A, Superman. Now, this brief 3-minute video completely reimagines what Superman could be by asking the very simple question: what if Superman was not like a human at all, but was still a hero? In this series, a mysterious shooting star appears above Smallville, and then, in the coming decades, a mysterious cryptid appears known as the Goat Hopper of Smallville, but eventually becomes the Spider Owl of Smallville. The images are left vague, but this non-humanoid version of Superman resembles nothing like a real person, being some weird flying spider. But despite how he looks, he actually remains a hero, taking down criminals within Kansas. It's hard to get a good look at him at this video, but I went ahead and upped the brightness on this main shot of him. I think the intention isn't to make him resemble Superman in any way, which I think is pretty cool. It's here though where the Superman cryptid gets his best feat, where he seemingly tears apart a getaway truck and leaves it in pieces all over a neighborhood. Now, assuming that Superman did most of the destruction of the truck in a single attack, which is implied given the short time frame and how no one saw him do it, to reduce a car to fragments, let alone a truck, is already a small building level feat. As we'll see for most of the series today, unfortunately, scaling speed is pretty much impossible. It's implied though that this Superman cryptid was at least able to easily get around all of Kansas, so maybe they were flying around at subsonic speed, but that's all we can say while being charitable. So how does DC Earth A Superman compare to the first analog horror Goku of this video, Keith, from the aptly named Dragon Ball analog horror? This series was made by the YouTuber Sackboy, and I do feel obligated to say that this series clearly uses AI images, which I really can't approve of, which is particularly unfortunate because I think the best episodes and moments of the series come when not using AI. Still, what's this series and how strong is the analog horror Goku here? In this series, scientists discover a mysterious element that mutates humans and turns them into essentially mentally insane mutated super soldiers. In this series, normal people, like some random guy named Keith, become the main Dragon Ball characters like Goku, Vegeta, Krillin, Broly, Bulma, and Chi-Chi. They essentially form a gang, going around beating up people and slowly taking over a city, and eventually forming a cult that worships them. Ultimately though, for a series based on Dragon Ball, the power scaling is really weird. Multiple times throughout the story, the supposed super soldiers who can fire Kamehamehas and have actual unquantified power levels, we can't really equate them to power levels from the original series, fail to successfully defeat a normal person. At this point, multiple people have managed to escape the Saiyans, survive getting attacked by them, dodge their attacks, and survived being hit by them directly, which somehow makes the whole super soldier thing really questionable. So when some characters say stuff like they're gonna blow up the planet, it seems incredibly unlikely that they're supposed to be taken seriously and are probably just insane. Instead, the best feat so far is when a mutated lizard, who in this universe is actually supposed to be Frieza, shows up and and instantly vaporizes someone with a laser beam from their fingers. This is a good feat for two reasons, as it both establishes that their attacks are indeed beams of energy, and also vaporizing a human is weirdly impressive. Based on calculations, this would come out to small building level in power, which is actually the same level of strength as Earth A Superman. So who would win then? Well, physically, Analog Horror Goku would probably be inferior to Superman, given how fraudulent they are when fighting normal people. That being said, their energy blasts are both faster and probably stronger than what Earth A Superman could do, especially if they are actually light speed lasers, and due to the fact that a casual blast is comparable to Earth A Superman's best feat. Also, they have better durability feats, with Frieza again being stated to pretty much be immune to firearms and potentially explosives being used on him. So Analog Horror Goku, especially with the other Saiyans, would likely be able to pull a win against Earth A Superman. So what's the next strongest Analog Horror Superman? The horrifying Superman we're going to talk about next is Superman from the Injustice tapes by the YouTuber The Liminal Smasher. Now, on the surface, this Superman seems far more in line with the one we're all familiar with. In this universe, Superman appears to be a very generic version of the character, the kind we first imagine when we think about Superman. However, this series follows an investigation by the FBI, who begin to suspect that this Superman is more sinister. Several gruesome events have been linked back to Superman, most notably a school bus full of children burning down with a Superman symbol burned on the inside. In an interview with a man named Criminal Zod, he reveals that most of the crimes he has been arrested for were actually done by Superman, not himself, and that he actually eats people. In a horrifying twist, the interviewer turns out to be Clark Kent, who had infiltrated the investigation on himself, cornering the head of the investigation and revealing his plan and identity as Superman. Superman explains that he's essentially getting everyone to love him so that he can wipe out the planet of life and leave the planet a disfigured husk. He then goes on to brutally kill the investigator and leave this horrifying picture behind. Now, we have two measures to go off of here for this Superman. Firstly, he is directly described as seemingly limitless in his abilities. Now, obviously, this does not mean he's a universe buster or anything, but I think it's safe to say that this puts him beyond anything humans are capable of, aka nuclear bombs or anything similar. This would put this Superman at city to mountain level at best, compared to the strongest nuclear bomb, the Tsar Bomba. You can also say this might put him beyond any earthly phenomena, which would put him above things like the highest magnitude 10 earthquakes, which range from island to continent level in power. This is supported by what Superman says as he reveals his true nature, as he says that he can disfigure the planet, which is usually defined as ruining by causing deep injuries to. Therefore, to disfigure something on the planetary scale would at bare minimum require continental power for it to really be considered a deep injury. Like Earth A Superman, Injustice Tape Superman doesn't really have any speed feats, unfortunately. Regardless, could he be Analog Horror Goku? Obviously. While technically Analog Horror Goku has those planet-busting statements, this is contradicted by pretty much every single other thing they do, so while Superman's planet-disfiguring statements are less impressive, those statements are not contradicted by lower-end showings, as they are instead supported by outsider statements. We got building-level Goku up against probably continent-level Superman. It's not close. So now we gotta find a stronger Analog Horror Goku, and there's only one more place to go. Now, of all the series I'm going to talk about today, there's only two that I will 100% ask you to go watch the entire thing after this video. And the first one is Kunzokumado's Dragon Ball The Others. This analog horror series is completely drawn by this artist and features genuine moments of Dragon Ball action, scale, and lore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Dragon Ball The Others takes a unique approach to analog horror by actually setting it within the original work rather than just an alternate universe. This story takes place in a fused anime and manga continuity of Dragon Ball Super, taking place directly after the events of Dragon Ball Super Superhero. In this story, beings from the Dead Zone begin sneaking into the main universe. These beings have the unique ability to drain the strength and abilities of the people that they look like, and just so happen to resemble the strongest fighters on the planet. This is particularly bad for Goku, who has more lookalikes in Dragon Ball than anyone else, with Bardock, Ginyu, Turles, Goten, and Goku Jr. all appearing appearing as these evil doppelgangers. Goku gets jumped by these copies and loses all of his strength, with the same happening to many of the other characters, including Broly and Vegeta, who all have plenty of copies throughout the series. Now, this story is still ongoing, and we haven't even met the main threat yet, but the strength of the others are pretty clear, as the story takes place with anime and manga material, and is supposedly right after canon events. The power scaling would be the same as normal Dragon Ball. Now, the power of the others does get divided amongst the many Deadite Goku clones, but we see that the Goku Black clone is capable of using Goku's Super Saiyan Blue power, which would be a massive portion of his strength, so it's safe to say that the strongest analog Karu Gokus are low multiversal or multiversal, just like mainline Goku. Now, obviously, this is a ridiculous jump in power, with these doppelgangers obviously being far beyond Injustice Tape's Superman. So is Goku the winner in the realm of analog horror? Well, there's one more Superman-ish character I'd like to talk about: the last son of Alcatraz. Now, I've discussed my love for the Monument mythos before, but this is my favorite and, in my opinion, the best analog horror series in history. Now, there is a lot of lore to cover, but here's what you need to know. At the end of the second season, a higher dimensional being known as the Horned Serpent blew up the Earth and caused the entire multiverse to collapse in on itself, resulting in the third season taking place in a new reality known as the Nixonverse. In this universe, some carryovers from the previous multiverse exist, notably the last son of Alcatraz, who is clearly an analog to Superman. Now, a lot of stuff happens to this poor guy, like getting hit with a nuclear bombardment, his eye getting ripped out, and getting brainwashed into thinking he's Jesus Christ. Finally, he gets forcibly empowered by a bunch of aliens from the moon and becomes an entity known as the Crescent King, a being who seemingly rivals the Horned Serpent in power. As it's stated, this form is the return of the Horned Serpent, and that a physical battle with him would result in the same cataclysm from the previous appearance of the Serpent. Now, I've gone over the scaling of Goku versus the Monument mythos before, and what I said pretty much goes for here as well, as the Crescent King, the last son of Alcatraz, would pretty much be on the exact same multiversal tier of power as Goku, or in this case, Deadite Goku. However, the difference here is that the last son, or the Crescent King, would have far more abilities than Deadite Goku, who really hasn't done much besides standing around and draining energy from Goku, something it wouldn't be able to do to the last son anyways. So ultimately, analog horror Superman would be stronger if we use a guy who is kinda like Superman and also in the form where he no longer resembles Superman in any way. Either way though, we are not surviving. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and as always, thank you to my members for supporting the channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.